You want any of this popcorn?
No, I am eating a steampunk hot dog.
Yeah, there's actually like small rivets in this. It's hard on the teeth.
Yeah, I thought this was relish, but it seems to be metal shavings.
Well, I guess that's what you get at the Progress Day. It's not really my favorite day of year, but I feel like there's just not a lot going on around here. We might as well, go.
But yeah, I mean, I thought it would be cool, but I don't really see much. I see massive police presence. Just absolutely massive.
Yeah, everybody seems to work in some sort of like government position, or they're a seedy character that's kind of like come to the surface to do some like illicit trading.
Oh yeah, but there's some trading going on. One thing I don't see, or hear, anywhere around here, any Imagine Dragon.
That's kind of nice though for a change, because I feel like they're always playing back home.
You know what, baby? That's progress.
It's kind of we're in a utopian society, actually.
Where everything's so clean. What's over here? An exhibit of, can't afford it. What about, can't afford that. I think I spent my last fantasy money on this hot dog.
All right, well, I guess we better head back home. They're checking IDs at the gates, I noticed, though, so I guess you'll have to tell them.
Of course. Monitor movements on the bridge. Hi. Yeah, I live on the other side, obviously. My name's Cadieux. I'm an animator and an illustrator. Thank you for asking.
And my name is, that's right, Ira Marcks. It's there on my ID. And I write and draw comics.
And this is a podcast, us two, about cartoons, where two lifelong artists, us and fans, talk about the mysterious and magical process of bringing cartoon stories to life. In today's episode, we're making progress with the second episode of our 3-part series about Netflix's Arcane. Welcome to Cartoon Feelings.
I've got kind of a big question. You want to start with a big question, or do we end with the big question?
No, I'd like to start with it. All right. That's cool.
Okay, so I was out of town last week.
Your story checks out so far.
Okay, and I went to the Academy Museum in LA, which has a bunch of like movie history stuff. And they had a Miyazaki exhibit, which if you're there right now, go see it. And they had a bunch of the matte paintings for, all our favorites. Totoro, Mononoke,
Classic.
Kiki.
The other ones, yeah.
Ponyo.
Didn't like that one that much, actually.
Okay, I'll stop there. But I found myself just getting very emotional looking at, I suppose it's gouache. They seem to all be painted in some kind of acrylic or gouache. But I was like looking at Kiki's house and it was like I was looking at a Renaissance painting. And I didn't quite grow up with Kiki's Delivery Service. I was, like a late teen. So it's not like I have a deep childhood relationship with that movie, but the art from it still was just making me have lots of feelings, theme of the show. But it kind of got me thinking how, when we talk about these cartoons, sometimes one of us like hits a wall with one of them. And some of those episodes haven't aired because we're like, okay, we just we're not hitting the right vibe with
the
this.
Lost episode.
Yeah, we've got a couple. Well, I think we've even mentioned them. We have our Raya episode, which we just didn't really like figure it out. We didn't really enter into that movie in the right way for some reason. But I was trying to put together maybe some sort of logic as to why some cartoons work and some don't. And obviously there's like aesthetic reasons and things that we just by default love. But all the things we talk about are really good
I agree.
At a base level. We're not watching garbage. We're not watching some low budget like direct to video production. We're watching like high quality entertainment, right? So I was reading this newsletter about literature and science fiction, and they had this little theory that I want to present to you and see if you agree with this. And if you do agree with it, where do you fall on this theoretical triangle of taste?
Ooh.
It's kind of a taste triangle, I think. So this comes from, it's actually 2 tiers of newsletter down. So I follow, God. So I follow this newsletter called Countercraft by a science fiction writer named Lincoln Mitchell. I've never read any of his books, but he's got a great newsletter on the craft of writing science fiction. And he referenced somebody else's blog post by a writer named Kat Valentine. You following me so far?
Yes. Wow, this is like an olden days internet story.
Yes. Get the red yarn out because we're tracking this back through the ages. Now, in her blog post, she kind of points out this idea of every story sits on this graph of these 3 vertices of plot, structure, and style. And you can play to one really strongly, one slightly strongly, and then the third gets neglected. And I was like, you know what? That actually makes a lot of sense to me, because sometimes when we're talking about a cartoon and I'm like, I just am not connecting with this, and I would go so far as to say I don't like it, I think it's because it's not fulfilling that vertice that I always want, which is usually something in the realm of structure and plot and a lot less style for some reason. Like as I get older, I grow to appreciate when a story locks together much more than like what the final work ends up looking like. And she has this cool term called one of those 3 elements always plays for team mundane, which is to say it's not the story's fault that it's lacking in this quality. It's just that inevitably one of these 3 elements will just be kind of plain, and it'll just be a feature of the finished product. So given that, I say I align myself more on this triangle with structure, a little bit of plot, and then style lately seems to fall a bit by the wayside. But how do you feel?
That is really tough.
It's a big question. You said you were ready for a big question up front.
I just didn't know. I'm going to take the week to think about it.
Okay, we'll pause.
It's hard because I feel like structure is the one thing that jumped out to me is like, I don't necessarily care that much about that. But I don't know if I don't think it doesn't matter. I think it's like I just don't tend to think about stories in that way. Like I just don't think that much about the structure or a formula of how something's put together or analyzing it through that. Like I'm never really the one, and you are, I think, between us. I'm never really the one that's like in the 3rd act, blah, blah, blah is happening. Because I'm not paying attention to that. And it's not like it doesn't exist or apply. I just don't think about things through those terms, like intuitively. But that, I don't want to say, this is a lot. Style, sometimes I'll go out on a limb here and say that I actually think sometimes style can carry something all on its own, actually. But it's just like, that's not everything. And this isn't animation, but like something I kind of think, like I feel that way is the movie The Fall. Have you seen that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, I don't think the story is bad. It's certainly unstructured. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but stylistically that movie is so interesting and beautiful to me that it like really doesn't matter what else is going on. And like I think it's a worthwhile piece of art. So I don't know, it's a little all over the place for me. I think it's okay sometimes for something to lack in one of those areas as long as it doesn't feel like they're straight up fumbling it, if that makes sense.
No, that's why I like the way she put it. One of these elements playing for team mundane, because it's not to be dismissive of it's a weak point. It's just, this is how the structure plays out. You sacrifice something to gain a little somewhere else, which I think is all positive. And I feel like I'm always trying to not have a negative approach to anything we talk about or watch, especially when we put it out into the world. And this Team Mundane idea was very appealing to me. So I just wanted to like throw that into the mix of conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I'd actually like to read that blog post.
I will send you the link, hopefully.
Thank you. Hopefully. What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, we got a long way to go. We're just starting. I hope I don't forget is what I'm saying. I won't forget. That's true. I don't forget links.
I'll follow up.
I would have actually guessed you would have leaned a bit more towards style. And I think that's why we are a good pair. Because if we were both all about structure, I think we would be a lot more boring as friends.
I
because,
agree.
We might be too like academic. Whereas like, I think I lean towards, I don't think I'm very smart, but I think I try to be smart in the structural way because I feel like that's what I do fine because I think that's what my job is leading towards. Whereas it makes sense that you're a little more invested in style because that's part of the craft path that I think you've chosen more professionally than I have.
It's like something about that just speaks to me. Well, and I think that's like how I got into this stuff to begin with. It's a little bit like that was gripping first. And that's probably true of most people. You watch these when you're kids or whatever. It's not like you're analyzing the plot, probably. But and there are just certain pieces of art that I love just because of like how it makes me feel with like no intellectual processing whatsoever, at least not up front. And I have to attribute that to the style. Don't know what else you could call it. So there's definitely some element to that.
I feel like it might particularly be episode 6, because today we're talking about episodes 4, 5, and 6 of the Arcane series. And 6 was like, this is some extreme style because we have not to get too far into the story yet,
spoiler at the end.
We have like the hoverboard team and there's kind of like this big punch out battle. And now that both of our main characters are kind of like fully functioning, not adults exactly, but neither of them is a child anymore. They're both kind of out in the world doing their thing. They have so much style between them. I'm like, if I was 14 and maybe 12 or anywhere in my teens, if I was I dream of finding a show like this, like when I was a kid. Like now that the story is really opened up and it's getting a little more gritty and aggressive with its plotting and like the violence is kind of like heightened up. I'm like, oh my God, this is the show I always wanted for myself. And it is really like so heavy on style. The plot and structure are great too, but it's truly leaning into like, we are capturing your imagination with like the body language of these characters. Yeah,
this show is just one big flex, literally and figuratively, and like good for them. But I think that was what really got me at first. And then it was only kind of as I watched it and was thinking about it that I was like, no, it was actually pretty good. Like also in addition to being really cool and engaging stylistically. But like some of the it really reminds me of how I felt about Spider-Verse. And then I was like, no offense to Spider-Verse, which is amazing and I love it and it's my best friend. But this one this show I describe to people sometimes is like, it's like Spider-Verse, but like even cooler, which is crazy. But like they're doing similar stuff, but it's just like pushed way even harder and like, I don't know. It's really good. It's really badass.
You said something last week, I can't quote you exactly, but we were talking about, these kind of two roles of the animators for this project. There's kind of the character animators and then just basically the matte painters. These are like the two key roles, whereas other studios have more elaborate breakdowns of the process, but these folks seemed really streamlined in a production way. And you were saying something about the background, how they leave a lot out. They leave a lot to the imagination. A lot is either cast in shadow or the painting style is maybe just the silhouette of a building, or it's just some like swipes of color that imply, like the structure in the background. Whereas Pixar or some other studios aren't able to do that. Everything needs to be like fully rendered. And you're saying how it kind of leaves something to your imagination, which is something that cartoons, I don't feel, do as much anymore. And I think it's great that they do, because there's something that engages the audience in a more interesting way if you don't give them everything visually.
Yeah.
Even though the show's giving you a lot visually, it's also kind of not in some very specific areas, which is very cool.
I'm going to completely fail at being pretentious here because I don't know where I read this quote and I don't even remember the quote exactly, just the idea of it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And it makes a lot of sense. And it was in the context of filmmaking, and it was somebody just saying, like, you need to keep in mind as a filmmaker that you're making half the movie and then the audience is making the other half in their head while they're watching it. And I was like, oh, that's what it means to kind of cultivate like the artist audience relationship. And it's like, you have to accept the fact that people are going to make up their own thing. When I was younger, maybe sometimes I'd read people online being like, this is my headcanon for this thing or whatever. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that's stupid. And now I'm like, why would you ever say that? Like, that's their own thing. Like, people should and can have that. And it like does not matter. And that's like where a lot of the love and affection comes from, is people playing with it in their mind. And like, that's what they're doing visually too. It's just so masterful of them to leverage like all of art history, all of like painterly style, and be like, you don't have to have everything be, you could just take a photo if you wanted it to be here's the world, like here's stuff, here's things. You don't need to paint stuff. And it's not like it's, they're pretty precise in a lot of ways, but it just, they're using like the most basic art fundamentals to tell a better story, and not being like, look how cool our, rendering engine is, and like, look how amazing the lighting is. And even though that is all good too.
Right. Yeah. I guess there's this fundamental idea of cartooning. I think I've brought it up on like a really early episode where, like, by definition, a cartoon is actually like a compositional sketch implying a more finished piece. It might be something, a proof of concept that would become like a big oil painting in an era where like maybe the church was funding a project. They're like, well, show me a version of it beforehand. And that would, I think, often be called like a cartoon. So that's where the term comes from. So it actually makes sense that as a young viewer, we find like this entry point into these worlds because they're not solidified yet. Like, there's space for us to imagine, and because these characters are vague enough where we can see ourselves in them in the way we can in an actor, in that they also don't exist in the real world. Like, it's one thing to identify with an actor, but another thing to identify with a cartoon character, or to like have emotions for a cartoon character. God damn it. Somewhere in my notes, I had this great, I'm sure I'll just come across it at some point, but somebody was pointing out by accident this great point about how we relate to cartoon characters.
Take all the time you need. This sounds interesting. I'm willing to wait a certain amount.
Okay, this isn't really a quote, and I actually have no idea where I got this, but maybe I'm just going to read this paragraph that I wrote down. I wish
We're very academic. Our very academic podcast where we keep quoting people that we don't remember or know what they said.
Okay, well, all I can say is I was reading this. It's not going to seem connected, but I was reading this book by Eric Davis, who's kind of like this weird theoretical critical writer who was writing a book about Led Zeppelin 4, the album. And somewhere in here, he started talking about like cartoonish nature of things. Like it was kind of in a dismissive way. He says, when live action media strays into impossible physics or a character becomes irrational, it is cartoonish. And I'm like, is he speaking ill of cartooning, or is he simply stating the facts that like the cool thing about cartooning is that it just goes a little bit farther, where like the energy of it radiates in an unreal way, and it actually helps you, if you are inclined towards that, connect with it in a better way. So he said that, and then I wrote this after I read that, apparently. And this was all very late at night, so I don't know how it all connects. But this is our show, so if we're wasting your time, go somewhere else.
Yeah, if you don't like it, leave.
All right, so I wrote this down. Like other illusionary art, cartooning has the capacity to evoke a character in your imagination. Once that happens, they live inside you. Their imaginary lives play out in exactly as if they were real, and you know them through your unique encounters with them. The version of the character inside you is unlike anyone else's. So somehow I got to that after reading what he said. I'm like, maybe that is true. Like when I think of, like kind of being in love with the fox from Robin Hood, like as a kid, or the girl squirrel from the Sword in the Stone. Like I feel like a lot of people have these stories of like, if you grew up kind of in the 80s or with 80s cartoons, you felt something for some of these like, they weren't sexualized, but they were sort of like gendered, romanticized characters. And I was like, there is something about cartooning that like allows you into this place of imagination that other things don't. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it is very strange. And I think about this a lot because, like, each generation is even more steeped in it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's obviously affected us. Like, I cannot imagine a part of my childhood that wasn't mostly revolved around cartoons and like fantasies of cartoon stuff. And I know this is pretty routine for kids, but like even like when Lion King came out, my sister and I would always like pretend to be the lions,
Yeah.
And like obviously that's basic kid stuff, but at the same time, like those were kind of like the adventures that we wanted to be able to have at that age because it seemed so fun and appealing. Or even like, who's going to be the bad guy for whatever like pretend thing we're doing. And like you'd model it a lot on Disney villains because they were so unique. It's not that we were well versed in that culturally as kids, but it's like Scar was just like, he was him and he was like this big personality and like took up a lot of space in our brains and that kind of, or like Ursula from The Little Mermaid and that kind of a thing. And yeah, I think it's weirder to contend with as you get older because you're aware of it and you're also not usually like playing pretend. Well, I mean, you can be and that's fine, but like I'm not running around pretending I'm Simba or whatever anymore.
No.
Yeah, but
Well,
it's like,
not
yeah,
as
that
often.
stuff just mattered to me in a way that other stuff didn't. And it is nice that there's no possible way for you to get hung up on the person playing the character, really. I mean, you could take it to the next level and become like a stalker of voice actors or something, but it's just not the same. There is none of that aspect of the character to be taking up room. Like, oh, that's George Clooney or whatever. But it just doesn't apply.
Exactly. That's what this kind of idea that in a way we all own our version of that character outright. Like other than, and cartooning is so collaborative, it's not even like one person created all the drawings for them. So really nobody owns a cartoon character but the people that love those characters, right? And I feel like that's something that just you understand maybe in some way when you're a kid, and that's why you want the t-shirt or that's why you want to play that character because you just have the right to have them.
Yeah, it's like you're not this, Simba or whatever is not like living their real life in Hollywood. Actually, and like a totally different person. That's true. Like literally they don't do anything besides be in whatever show or movie that you like.
Yeah. Okay, can I ask another question based on
No.
that this kind of
You've had your amount. No, you may.
Okay, the way you said no is the point I'm making here. So now Arcane is kind of like a maturing of this idea because now that we have like a generation of people that have these deep-seated feelings for these cartoon characters, and when we want to go out and do our own, if we're truly artists, we want to excel beyond the thing we're referencing. And I feel like Arcane is truly that. It's people that love cartooning that want to advance what it can do. And there's something that I know I said this is a show I would love as a teen, but also I think it goes a little beyond that and kind of can connect with adults in a way that I don't know. I know adults can love any, We can love Mitchell's versus the Machines as adults or whatever. But there's something about Arcane that is like truly adult in its content. And I think it might just be because you were so passionate about the show. I can't help but like think of you constantly while I'm watching. I'm like, that's why Caitlin loves this. Or like, that's why Caitlin loves this. Like there's this kind of like frenetic, intense, it's not a negative energy, but it's a very punchy, resilient energy that I think you have, that I have a little bit of too. I think I back down in the face of your version of that a bit.
I am the punchier of us. Yes.
Yeah, you're a little more punchy. But this show is a very punchy show. And I'm like, oh, there's the Caitlin of this show.
100%.
I don't know if are you seeing that, right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I immediately got the same haircut that Vi did, and I named my dog after her. So I don't know if I mentioned that in the first episode, but we got a dog in January, and we named it Violet. It was either going to be that or Jean-Luc, because I was watching a lot of Next Generation at the time too. But this is how the dice fell. So yeah, there's definitely a clicking there, a punching, if you will.
A lot of punching in this show.
There's going to be more.
I can't wait. Yeah, I think there's going to be more steampunk gloves going forward, I'm guessing, right?
I won't spoil it.
Oh, thank you. Well, I didn't do too much digging outside of like whatever weird headspace I was in where I decided to like analyze the role of cartoons in our lives. But you got anything about this show that you've learned since we last spoke, or?
Really something that I just wanted to, and it might not be relevant, but I'll just go into it for a minute anyway. And if it's nothing, cut it out.
Well, it's not any less relevant than wherever we just came back from. So
I don't know. Maybe we won't have any cartoon feelings about this.
Okay.
Maybe we will. I don't know. But I was like, okay, so what is Fortitia's deal? Because I kind of had held off on researching that for the first episode because I knew we're getting, it's a 3-part thing. We got these first 3 episodes. There's a lot of upfront stuff, and a lot of like down the road potential for us to talk about. So maybe we can talk more about the studio later. But in my research, I kind of found that it's kind of hard to find a lot of information about them. One of the most informative things that I found was a YouTube video from somebody who was clearly like a hobbyist who just did as much digging as he could. And even he was like, I had a lot of trouble finding this. There's no information about this person online. I was like, okay, but like you have most of the information. So I trust that you did this research. And if you go to Fortitia's YouTube channel, there's very little on it. But there's Arcane trailer, a little bit of Arcane stuff, and some of their past work from kind of a long time ago. And I just think that stuff is interesting to comb through. And I was surprised by some of the stuff that I had found, because like one of the videos that they did was like a Gorillaz music video, which I found kind of surprising. And it's also like mostly live action with just the characters being animated in a really hyper realistically 3D way that does not speak at all to their current kind of niche in the industry. But it was really interesting to look at. They did a lot of music videos, and they've done a lot of video game related stuff, because there was also this, I think it was Age of Mayhem, and it was a CG trailer, just like all animation, for a video game of the same name. Not familiar with it, but you can really feel the Arcane vibes in that video, and I think it's from 2014, I want to say. It might have been 2017, actually. But, well before any of the Arcane stuff that we know now had been produced. And it's clearly rough in comparison. But it's really fascinating to go back and watch that and see sort of the foundation, I guess, of where this look and feel started to come from and how far it's come. And I would say if you're interested in that, to watch that video. And then also they did a music video for one of League of Legends, like championship esports events. And it's called Rise. I don't even remember who sings the song, but it's basically a narrative, like this guy getting through all these fights, whatever. It's mostly visual, like really style heavy, but it's really awesome. And that was one of the videos that I remember seeing and being like, they should make a series because the polish on this is unreal. So it's just kind of a cool visual history to see, like, what are they doing before? And I know they were doing like Coca-Cola ads and like Sprite ads and stuff back in the day, which I didn't find. I could not find those, but I'm sure they're out there. And then to just like what they're doing now and kind of this niche that they have now, it's really interesting. Something that I also didn't know, and I would never have been able to tell at first glance, is that apparently they did like a half an hour Marvel animation that's Rocket the raccoon and Groot like going on a space adventure, and it's all animated. And I didn't get a chance to watch it because it's about like half an hour. But now I'm really curious just to see the flavor of it, because the art style, just looking at stills of it, it just looks like a totally different studio. And now I really want to know more about, like, what is your process? Like, who is making this stuff? You know, what is your timeline? Like, I know that Pixar and different studios, like, also did commercials alongside their film work a lot. And it's just something that people don't generally talk about that much. And we don't see that Pixar did like Lifesavers commercials or whatever weird stuff they were doing back in the day. But I just think that's like an interesting aspect of studio history. And I want more behind the scenes and like, what are you guys doing? But I'm sure because they're like a cool European studio, they're, you know, actually taking their time off when they get it and not like working more on making behind the scenes stuff, which I can't blame them for.
Have they always been connected to Riot, or is that early work independent, like the Gorillaz work? Did you notice?
Yeah, no, that was definitely, they were just a studio in Paris doing their own thing. And I assume, just connecting the dots, that Riot found them because they were doing music video work. Because if I am not mistaken, their first project with Riot was the Get Jinxed music video. Which again you can find, and it definitely has some early stylings of arcade stuff, and obviously it's just a character music video about Jinx. And I think actually the song in that music video makes a cameo in the show Arcane, which I think is kind of fun. And I think they just did that as a one-off, and I don't know if they just loved it so much that they decided to start building this relationship, or really how that went. But if somebody does know, let us know, because I'm very curious, and I want to know, you know, how they identified like how this kind of cosmically awesome work relationship that they seem to have formed. I don't know if you saw this recently, and I'll be honest, I don't really know what it means, but recently they announced that Riot had like invested an equity share into Fortiche, which asterisk, I don't know what that is actually, because I don't know about money stuff. But I gather that they are basically investing a significant stake in Fortiche as a studio and kind of solidifying that partnership. And that's exciting. I'm definitely intrigued, but it all just makes me want to know more about what's going on in there.
Yeah, it's interesting because you could kind of look back at not exactly a similar situation, other than early Pixar came into a bunch of money when they became associated with Steve Jobs. But Steve Jobs didn't have like video game IP to direct what he wanted that studio to do. So they were kind of like at the whim of their directors, right? So it would be awesome to think that this studio is going to have the opportunities that Pixar did, where they could kind of dip into different worlds and kind of figure out how to render that. It's like, well, we've done our urban fantasy story. Now what if we do a totally different type of science fiction or fantasy or whatever, like a contemporary story? I feel like they have the potential, because it seems to me whenever you're able to lock in a look and feel so clearly, you just have a sensitivity towards what it takes to accomplish that. And therefore you can do it with other things, because you know how to set the table right for your team to fulfill that goal. And I'm like, oh, I'm sure they could do other cool things, but I wonder if they'll just somehow always now be tied to League of Legends, which seems just how much things go, right? Like these people get tied up in Marvel or Disney, and like the same thing happens in video games all the time. So I guess we'll
that
see,
definitely
but it is
seems
the beginning of something.
Likely. And that's like, I think a good aspect of that is that there's a lot of vibes that League of Legends contains. That like, yeah, there's like this steampunk city and then like the Art Nouveau underground and stuff, but there's other things that they've done. And even if you want to get weird with it, I know very vaguely that they have had different, it's just purely aesthetic, I gather. But for example, like in League, they'll have a bunch of different skins for the characters that are like space themed. And it's like they're from some kind of alternate universe where it is sci-fi. Mm-hmm. And so they like have designs and bases for just that kind of thing. And that also happens to still be in the League of Legends world. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with any of that, really. But it does feel like a overall pretty cool potential for neat stuff.
Yeah. Should we get into this 3-episode arc?
I'm ready.
Welcome to Progress Day.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
We're doing it today. Well, no, I don't have anything progressive to show.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Things are significantly different because we have now sprung roughly maybe 7 years or so into the future. So things are different for everybody. Certain characters are not present right away at the beginning of this 3-episode arc. We spend a lot of time up front hanging out in Piltover, experiencing Progress Day, which seems like a really nice holiday, big World's Fair vibes, lots of fancy new inventions, rah, we're so great, rich people looking good in the city, etc., until it is marred horrifically by what is ostensibly some kind of terrorist activity.
Whoa.
Yeah, you know.
I did. I was watching it. They had the hoverboard of my childhood dreams in action on screen. That was
super
a bit of a
dangerous
surprise. That came out of nowhere.
Yes.
Like literally.
Like all good mysteries do. So that's where we are. I'm running out of steam.
Okay, well, Progress Day, I feel like we got to sit here for it's interesting with the show. I think I was kind of picking up on this last time. It's so character centric. It actually doesn't, the camera rarely pans away to let you kind of take a tour of this world. And now we're actually seeing the overworld a bit, which is a lot more developed and kind of utopian. And I just want a minute to look around, but all it gives you, episode 4 opens with Progress Day. The gates open, a small steampunk butterfly flies through, and then pretty much quickly cuts to some kind of disaster. Like, the show doesn't want to give you the Disney song and dance of like, welcome to our town, here's everybody. Like, it's just...
Bonjour.
Exactly.
That's true, it doesn't have that.
Which I guess is fine. Again, it's an adult show for adults.
Honestly, too, I think that is smart of them because I do think it's always better to keep you interested than not. And for multiple plot reasons, even, I think they benefit from not fleshing it out too much. Because we see pretty heavily in this episode, I believe, the political structure of Piltover, where they have this council reigning over ? And like, that's the thing. It's not clear how this governing body operates. But I don't think it needs to be. And I think it's very smart of them to not bother explaining it in any way. And it's just like, we don't need to talk about who these people are, where they came from, how this works, are they elected, da-da-da-da-da. Like, we don't. You just need to know, like, people are in charge, kind of the general flavor. It's more about personality and, like, bigger concepts. Mm-hmm. So I think they are correct to do that because otherwise you're just opening yourself up to the criticism that it's, like, not fleshed out enough. And this is the best way to handle it, I think, where you don't need to flesh it out and it's perfectly good enough for the role that it serves in the story.
It stays relatively street level, goes below street level, and like one tier above to the like kind of the sheriff or like low level politicians, but not the bigger old like there's bigger players that, and some shows, like The Wire was a show that kind of dipped into all these corners, like going as far from like the street level as could be. But this show is like, okay, we're keeping it kind of here centered around this group, and this other group, and how they all kind of interact with each other. You know what? Did you ever read The Difference Engine? Do you know that book?
No.
William Gibson is he's like the father of cyberpunk. He's like the neuromancer guy. Did you ever read that book?
Oh yeah, no, I haven't read any, but I know. Yeah.
This show's suddenly opening up the way it does. I'm like, oh, okay. The Difference Engine. It's basically like the first steampunk novel, I guess. It's from 1990, and it's got like all the tropes that this show has, which is to say, like, there's kind of archetypes of characters that represent certain like political figures in a certain era of like European history. Like The Difference Engine is set in London. It's about the idea that Charles Babbage, who invented the first computer, accelerated that process so fast that steam power and computer technology moved at the same rate. And so you have like hackers, but they're called like clankers because they're using punch cards, but they're basically like 90s hackers. And all these tropes are so goofy now from like movies like Hackers and stuff, but I feel like they're really mining that book. So it's kind of worth looking at, or at least reading the plot summary, because you can kind of see that this show might have taken a bit of a formula from that. So like when you're saying it is kind of about the politics, like I'm like, oh yeah, the show is really kind of being about something more than it's about individual characters. It's kind of about societies.
Yeah. Well,
right? And social structure.
They straddle the line so well between the two, because like everything they do is in the vehicle of characters that have a ton of appeal. And like Vi and Jinx's whole deal in like interpersonal relationships is really interesting, and sort of is about politics, but it's actually really not. It's really personal, family, like, cycle of violence and cycle of abuse kind of stuff. And then you also have this thing where it's about like rich people exploiting poor people and inequality and these different political like ways of governing. Sorta. It's like it's a little bit more high concept. I don't know if this is the right thing, but it's a little more conceptual in that regard. And then even then it's like Jace as a character, textbook himbo, kind of an idiot, bless his heart. And then, but his role in a political structure, then they start to explore that. So it all kind of nets together really nicely.
Right. Everybody's kind of a victim of their circumstances, and then their kind of character arc emerges from that. And it's also like, it's all quite tragic. It's like, and I suppose like when I was listening to some of the animators talk, one of them had been working for DreamWorks, and he moved back to France to take this job, but also to like, because he missed his culture, he said. And I find that Americans don't talk that way. Like if you take a job, it's for your own personal kind of your goals and the impact you want to make. We don't like talk about American culture. If anything, I feel like Americans are embarrassed of their culture. Like, but in France, this French animator is like, I could have all the jobs in the world, but I want to return to the culture, and like something that I'm part of a bigger whole was kind of like what he was implying. I'm like, oh yeah, it's just interesting because America is such not that. To hear Europeans talk in that way, it like just to me, and probably a lot of Americans, like feels kind of old fashioned. But I think that's what's special about this show, is that it has this historical resonance where it's kind of about these like, there are points in history like the Luddites, these kind of like anti-technological groups, like people that were suppressed by industrial progress, that were like, this is destroying us. Don't you see? Like it's taking our jobs. There's been so many moments like that in history that Europe has like a deeper understanding of all that. And I feel like that kind of is coming through in the show, in the way it's kind of quite serious about its themes, even though it's still like a fun, action-packed cartoon. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm starting to read it as, but that might be
Yeah.
me giving it more than it's offering
Well,
up. But I don't know.
I can't speak to the European aspect of it, but it's just, I will draw the parallel that it reminds me frequently, this show, of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Not because they have anything in common, really, but almost the contrasts between them. Because something that really jumped out to me about this is that it's basically about like fantastical individuals, and they sort of all do have like their special power or whatever. It's not 100% true, but everyone has their iconic thing or a weapon or something like that. Everybody has their own very distinctive flavor in the same way that superheroes do. But tonally, they're just so different. And that, like, and I say this as somebody who enjoys Marvel movies, and I'm not even disparaging them, but I don't really consider them good per se. They can be really fun, and they can be like well made, but I'm not really emotionally invested in them, personally speaking, because it just doesn't feel like they're not serious. And sometimes they will come across kind of heavy-handedly, serious about something or really dramatic. But I don't think if you plumb the depths, there's any real like political message there that is really particularly profound or meaningful. It's sort of more just kind of like thinly props itself up on American like military cool stuff, and it just, there's not a lot going on there that's any kind of deep. And I won't pretend like Arcane is so deep. It's just that I feel like it's being a little more thoughtful and a little more aggressive, maybe, in what it's saying. And not even always.
Because its characters suffer at the hands of the story, whereas in Marvel, like everybody's rebooted. Like nobody actually can die. There's a multiverse for everyone. Whereas Arcane, I don't know who's going to be alive at the end of this show. And that's like a good feeling. Like I don't get stressed by that. I want to know that there are stakes for the narrative, because then it becomes a story that's important by knowing that some of our main characters can die. And I think that's like, good.
When there is a dramatic death or inciting incident in Marvel, it does feel very like this was taken out of a comic book grab bag.
Yeah.
Like nobody in Marvel is going to be a child that accidentally blew up their whole family in the way that happened in this show. It just isn't, they are not in the same realm whatsoever. And I think that makes this show a lot more appealing as a piece of art that you can engage with, not as popcorny.
Right. Yeah. There's nothing quite popcorny. In fact, if I were to say anything against this show is that its tone is so intense that I am sometimes like, please just, I'm like sweating. Like, can we see the cute little white puppy dog thing with the cataract eye? Like, what's the yogurt, the Yoda yogurt guy? What kind of guy is he? The scientist?
The Yordle.
Yordle. I'm never going to remember that word.
You don't need to. I just tell you what, there's no need. You don't need to know that.
He's like the cutest thing, and then he has an even cuter thing that follows him around, and
they both have mustaches, which is really nice.
it's nice. There's some weird aesthetic things going on in the show. That's one of them. I'm like, I guess this is cute. It's also a little troubling. I love that did you notice the dog has a cataract? I think it's because my dog also has one. I'm like, oh, it's just this dog is kind of tragic also, like everybody else.
One has to hope that it wasn't through some kind of scientific experiment or misfire that he got such a cataract.
Are we going to get that backstory? And now, okay, so we have Yordle, and then we meet another similar looking character in sort of a red light district scene where they go to this kind of cabaret area. You know who I'm talking about? There's like
she's like the brothel mistress, right? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, but her face is like rendered in a way where I'm like,
Go on.
It's like she's, I don't know. It's not Valley of the Uncanny. Maybe it is. Like there's a little bit too much visual information, but it's somehow not locking together. I don't know. Maybe she's supposed to be scary.
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think she's supposed to look like she's been through a lot.
Yeah, she's very mature.
And I think that is accurate.
Okay. It's just it's just a type of cartoon character design you don't really see, and something that's just popping up on Netflix. Like, it would make sense for me to go to YouTube and dig into, like, did you know this animation from, like, Germany came out in 1987 and here's the characters, and you're like, whoa. I was having a bit of that reaction to her.
Well, and like, I don't know if this is really what you're saying at all. Like, maybe it's not, but I like that about this show, because it actually feels like the characters are real people. Because like, why every character just has like what actual people would have. And like, the asymmetry in character design is so pervasive in this show.
Yeah.
I do find it a little distracting that one of his eyebrows is like much more prominent than the other one.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And it's, yeah, but like, it just makes him feel more real though. It really does. And like, a character like that feels like an actual person in a way, which is like, that was probably a difficult thing to be like, okay, we'll make this kind of like alien spirit goblin sort of a lady. And she runs a seedy brothel in like the seediest part of seedy town.
Yeah.
And she's like keeping it together the best she can. Like, she's obviously in like a stressful profession with like probably a pretty stressful life. And like, all of that I feel like actually is distilled pretty well in her character. And this reminds me of another one that I wanted to talk about, because I think I loved this show pretty quickly. But when this character showed up, and he is just absolutely not an important character whatsoever, I was just like, I can't believe this. Like, how is this real? And it's the prison guard, or the prison warden. When Kaylin goes to the Stillwater prison to figure out what's going on with this attack and this guy that got injured and then he went to jail. And he's like this big gray-skinned, like, ogre guy. And there's just something about that character design that is just like, I cannot look away. I mean, the voice is also really good. And it just like, is somehow this perfect fit for this character. And he's got like black lips, like goth lips sort of a thing going on. And he's completely asymmetrical in his design. And it's just like, I don't understand how you technologically had the capability to make this character. And he's not pretty at all, but like, the appeal is so strong, and just like the way that he's animated is so interesting to me that when I saw that, I was just mesmerized. And that, for some reason, that character stands out to me so intensely as an epitome of just like, why is this show so ridiculously good that this unnamed character with probably like a minute of screen time total is so well done? It's like, I'm like, this guy's a real guy. He seems like a dick. Like, he's really confident and rude and like fat. And, you know, probably just like sits behind the desk all day and like doesn't that, you know, like everything about his character, you're just like, you know exactly who he is, but he also feels very unique.
Right. Everybody feels weightier, like their physics and their emotional state is all in a, like, the gravity seems a lot stronger in this cartoon than many other types of cartoons we've talked about. Like, big people feel heavy. When somebody hits something, they're really hitting it. When somebody sits down, like the chair, you can feel it more than when it happens in like a Disney movie. Because I feel like cartooning always does come back to some of those like Chuck Jones rules of physics, even with personality type. It's like, when you describe that character, I'm like, he is a massive volume of a figure. And that's just not something that like studios pursue a lot of the time. And it really, puts the show in a different class. There's something in the dialogue I was noticing as well. Like, the characters speak really bluntly and in short phrases. No one's like, that must have hurt. Like, nobody adds any type of inflection. They might be like, whoops, or they might do a little something ironic, but you really kind of have to lean into to engage with them. Whereas in cartooning, so much of it is about like putting it right in your face and a song telling you about a character. The show is like way more reserved with when somebody says something and like what it means. You know, they speak in like, other than you get a little bit of villain monologue from what's his name? Silco. He does a little bit of like speaking to the themes. Like he has some phrases I wrote down that I'm like, and that's what this show is about. He just said it. But most of the other characters, they don't ever really do that. Especially like Vi. I feel like in this middle section of the show, she's like either kind of like aggressively flirty or like really angry or like, we're going here, we're doing it. Like
she's right to be like that. What a correct character.
Have you seen what's the Mission Impossible movie with
No, I haven't
Henry
seen it.
Okay. Well, did you see the trailer for the one with Henry Cavill where he like jacks his arms? He like pumps them like a shotgun.
Yes.
Vi does that exact move in
and
the
like, people love it.
4.
And the people, of course, I mean me specifically, having a great time with this family entertainment.
For all the seriousness of the show, there are some funny things because when something's so serious, you can't help but laugh every once in a while. But like in episode 4, when Jace is introducing, so he's built this giant arm, like one big brutish arm and then one kind of laser arm, and where you put the little kind of blue orb in and it charges it. And he's like, the workers will use these, and he charges it up, and it's like, that thing is clearly violent. And the little Yordle guy is like, I think we need to test for 10 more years. They're like, what could possibly go wrong? It's like, you made a smashing arm and a laser alien arm.
This is literally a gauntlet. Like that, people don't use those for mining. What are you talking about? And I will point out, I actually missed this the first few times I watched this, but when they test the laser arm, they actually burn the little dog thing.
Yeah,
they like zap him a little bit.
I know,
and it's
like
so
sad.
Heimerdinger is right to be like, I think you guys need to chill out for a minute.
Right.
But you can definitely see both sides, but that is one where it's like, these are lethal weapons.
It is that, but it's like the world we live in, right? It's like we make these technologies, they're all a little bit dangerous, but we can't help but indulge them to the point where they become just part of our lives, to the point where they just take over, right?
Yeah.
Like that is kind of what progress is in this. I don't know. The Progress City, again, this is one of those themes that I'm not sure if the show comes back to, but because it's got that Disney flavor of like the great big beautiful tomorrow, this kind of theoretical never ending enlightenment journey that like the perfect society could go on, but to like what end? Whereas like technology is always making everything more beautiful, but what is it like standing on top of, like what people are underneath that surface? That kind of like H.G. Wells-ish thing. The show really has that right there to dig into really deeply, and it almost does, but it almost kind of doesn't in a way. I guess I just want the show to be like 4 different shows, I think.
I think you just need to finish it. I can't.
Oh, you think is it all going to be resolved?
Well,
for me,
I don't know if it'll be resolved.
Don't you feel like there's a lot more? This show is juggling so many characters and kind of scenarios. I'm like, how are you going to wrap this up in like another couple episodes? It seems. Yeah,
that's tough. I'm excited for you to finish it. There's a lot of stuff too that we're talking about that I'm like, I have more to say about this, but I can't.
Because we're stuck in the middle.
But I think that's half the fun of like me having seen it, you watching it concurrently. And then of course I have some annoying like League of Legends knowledge with which to fill in some gaps that are not literally in the show. But yeah, there's a lot going on.
So are we meeting any like League of Legends characters in this?
A lot of them are, and I say this too. I don't play League. I only play Team Fight Tactics. It has all the same characters, but is a totally different type of game. It also doesn't have all the same characters. I don't really know, basically. A lot of these characters are in Team Fight Tactics, and the set of characters that you play with lately, and like when this show came out, is actually really closely tied together. For example, like it's basically a game where you make a team of people, these champions, and then they fight each other, like with the other team, and you're just picking from a pool of all of them. So there is like Vi is in the game, and it's like Arcane Vi, and Jinx is in the game, and it's Arcane Jinx. And like right now they're both in this game, and if you play both of them at the same time, they actually like cancel out each other's powers because they're like rivals with each other. Mm-hmm. So there's interesting stuff like that. And like, again, like Silco was not a character in any of these games. And then they added him maybe a month ago to Teamfight Tactics. So that's kind of interesting. Like Heimerdinger is in it. The Yordle guy. Jace is also in it. Like a lot of them are. But it's interesting the ones that aren't. Like Mel is not, to the best of my knowledge, not a part of the universe at all. But them adding Silco to the game also makes it seem like maybe they'll add him. It's a weird relationship even talking about the games because they have nothing in common. And they do have little bits of lore and stuff that are now overlapping, but I was watching this. It was the only thing that came up when I put into YouTube, like behind the like Fortige behind the scenes. And really it was more of just like Arcane behind the scenes by Netflix. Mm-hmm. But two of the people that worked on this show from the Riot side, I want to say it was like Christian Link and some other guy who sadly I'm forgetting his name. But both of them talked about, you know, having worked together for many years at Riot and also working on like Jinx as a character when she first came out. And it's nothing alike with the character in this show. And frankly, tacky, which I got into in the first episode of this podcast series. Like these if you just Google like Vi League of Legends, you're going to find some trashy character art that's just so bad. It's no offense, guys, but like they're not interesting, compelling characters. They're like cheesy pinup, like 12-year-old boy, not good characters. And I am just fascinated endlessly that they turned those into something interesting. And even Jinx, she's not totally terrible all the time, but like if you watch the Get Jinx music video, she's very different. And it is kind of a little bit like clearly she was inspired by Harley Quinn.
Right.
And then it's just like a little bit like Hot Topic pinup, I guess, sort of deal with her. Like it's just not the same. There's none of the complexity.
How old is she? Do you have a sense?
Unclear. Adult like though. I think like more definitively adult.
Okay, I hope so, because there's something about. I mean, she's supposed to be uncomfortable. She's like a Harley Quinn, but like slightly more grounded. So you're like, wow, what is really going on? Like she's kind of upsetting. Like I can't. Like I'm worried for her.
Yeah, frankly, I think she just has a very genuine depiction. She's not wacky. Like she actually has mental.
No. Yeah, she's kind of not cartoonish at all.
I think it's not like cutesy and funny like Harley Quinn tries to be. It's not that. It's like, oh God, like this is a tragedy.
Yeah, I'm kind of. It's curious because it makes her, I guess. She almost seems like hopelessly. Like I don't know if she can be. Not cured, I don't want to say. It almost seems like she does have a mental illness of some sort, or she's just, I don't know. I don't want to insult anybody by like putting her in a category of something because I don't really know what her condition is or what it's supposed to be. But it seems like based on something real almost, or I mean, maybe it's not. It's also very heightened. But sometimes there's like a look in her eye or the way she responds to something where she's kind of vacant. Like schizophrenic almost, or like a sociopath, or which are like traits of villain characters, I guess. But it's not quite that simple. It's kind of interesting though.
No,
I'm interested to see where it goes.
It's really interesting. And I didn't realize this either, but there's a certain like scratchy visualization that'll happen if she's like having these hallucinations or whatever. And I didn't notice this either right away, but it's showing up as early as the very first episode. Like, like in the first minute of the first episode.
Right.
And I find that to be some kind of implication that this is definitely like baseline. She's got this issue and all the rest of her childhood situation does absolutely nothing to help. It's only a bad kind of environment for somebody who has any kind of mental health issues.
Yeah, it makes me like, is the show kind of seems to be from her point of view. Like she's the one that we seem to get the most kind of interiorness from. But I guess also Silco we kind of do too, because we get his backstory and kind of his tragedy. But Vi, I feel like at this point at least, I understand why she's done what she's done and where she comes from, but I don't feel like I've ever been in her head as much as we kind of get Jinx, because Jinx has like her little artifacts that we get close-ups of, and like you said, there's this kind of scratchy aesthetic that is in her mind, but also on the stuff she makes. I feel a lot more invested in what's going to happen to her than Vi exactly, I think.
Yeah. I feel like Vi occupies a little bit more of a traditional protagonist sort of a role. And almost in the same way, I feel like we bring up Harry Potter too much. But like, it's a good example for some bad things, I guess, sometimes. But like, Harry Potter being a blank slate, like, you actually get a lot of his interiority, but it's pretty generic. Like, I'm afraid of this scary thing. I hope a bad thing doesn't happen. Like, you know, that kind of thing. But I feel like Vi is a little bit more of that, except she's like more of a badass. It's not like she's afraid of stuff, but she's not thinking a lot about things either. Like, punchy, you know? And so she's making things happen, and we are kind of participating along with her. And it's just not as important. Like, her journey includes probably some, you know, mental stuff that is complicated, but it's not anywhere near the main concern. So we're just not really needing that perspective.
Yeah, she has that. This is kind of a character trait I find just a little less interesting. I think she is a well-designed character, and I do get a bit of a thrill from like her aggression, but she's so confident and kind of unflinchingly accurate in everything she does. It's almost a little too clockworky. Like, I want her to have a little bit more of a trait of like an Indiana Jones character. You can see moments like Indiana Jones is actually not a hero. He's just like an observer. He fails, he falls, he does like goofy things. It makes him like a little more relatable and kind of charming in that way. But of course, he's never really going to die. So it's still like a total fantasy. But Vi is so like precise and accurate, and always, it's not that she's always right, but she always kind of seems to succeed in what she's trying to accomplish, that it runs a little like, okay, but like, I don't believe that she's going to fail, other than just in some key plot moments where it's like, oh, you had to let your sister down because we need the story to go on. So I'm curious in a very different way to see how she plays out, because I feel this show is not done like surprising me at all. But right now I'm kind of like, okay, Vi's just like this super confident badass.
Yeah.
Which is fine. It's just not like super engaging.
Yeah, there's not much to expand on. It's not like you're trying to figure out what her deal is.
That's cool. I mean, I like a good punching character around. Just sometimes
Everybody
I don't
needs at least one.
Yeah. And they give her not too much time anyway. It's not like if she was maybe the one central lead in every scene, I'd probably be more exhausted. But we jump around so much that it's really not even like she's the main character, other than the show is kind of following their timeline and she's on the poster.
Well, and I guess we can't really get into this too much because I don't think you would have gotten there yet. Exactly. So she's hanging out with Caitlin.
Yeah. Caitlin, who's sweet like a cupcake.
Apparently. And extremely tall.
Very tall.
Two things that I'm like, very, very tall. Good for her. Must be nice. Can't possibly fathom. But their relationship, I think, is what is interesting to watch, because it's like, it's a buddy cop thing with a cop and somebody who hates cops, which is a classic tale as old as time kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And just like their personalities are so different. Like, that's why I find both of them to be not as engaging as a Jinx type character. Even like Silco, I find just like very, very fascinating. There's a lot to unpack there. And they're not, but I think they're like a fun dynamic to explore. Like, I really like Caitlin. Caitlin's just kind of a weird character when you think of it, like on paper. Like, wealthy, privileged background, but like doesn't really feel like doing that. But it's not like she goes out and does something crazy or like starts graffitiing or something. She just like gets a normal cop job and like tries to do a good job. Like, that's it. So she just feels like a person. I'm like, okay, like neither super special and interesting nor, you know, mundane and boring.
Yeah. You know what? That's a good point though, because her point she's in the shooting match with what,
her
I
name's
don't remember.
Grayson, the cop, the cool
Yes.
cop.
Okay, so they're in the shooting match and she claims that Grayson lets her win, and then Grayson like challenges her to be like, "Well, I know why I'm good at this because I want to protect my people, but like why are you good at it?" We don't get an answer. It's like, "Oh, your trait is like you're kind of an empty vessel. Like you could use this for good or evil, like we don't really know what you're going to do with this like superpower you have, basically." Like she's kind of an undefined superhero. She doesn't really stand for anything yet, which is cool, which I think makes her a little more interesting than Vi, because I find that more appealing, because I feel like artists go through this all the time. You're like, well, I'm building these skills, but then when you enter a career, you're like, well, what do I do with them? Like there are actual good ways to like make art, and there are kind of evil ways to like use your visual communication skills. And so it's something like, you know, artists think about, which is why it's in a show made by artists maybe. But I like a good sharpshooter. That's like I love that the way they can use that ability, because you can build this like tension of, are they going to make the shot or not type of thing.
Yeah. Well, something I love about that too, and God, you got to watch this show 17 to 50 times to really take in all the details.
Okay.
But when Vi gets injured in this fight and Kaylin shows up at the last minute and scares her away, she's missing on purpose. Like she could have lethally shot Savika, is the name of this opposing character, like Silco's number 2 person. And she could have easily killed her, because you know that she's that good of a shot, and that she's hitting her in like a non-dangerous way.
Yeah.
On purpose. And I'm just like, oh, and that's again because she doesn't have a conviction either way. So she's like not going to take a lethal shot. And that's another thing to know about her character.
You got more Caitlin?
I think she's
Thoughts?
Cool. Well, I mean, I think it's a cool indication of who she is as a character. A lot of stuff about her is like centrism, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, you know, somebody who's of this particular world and background, but has the truth must be somewhere in the middle, you know, kind of attitude.
Right.
One might say naively.
Well,
perhaps.
Sulco says, "What is truth but a survivor's story?" Right? So I guess is this a show about the story of this city? I don't know. And who tells it?
Time will tell. I can't answer this question.
Damn it.
You got 3 more episodes. Then we're going to really unpack.
Okay, let's talk about the sex scene. We don't get to talk about those a lot on this show.
I know. Cartoons are so boring.
I know,
Where's
finally.
the good stuff?
This was kind of funny to me because, first of all, just a cartoon sex scene is kind of a funny thing in general, because it's not something that you see a lot. And this one is funny in the way that it, do you know that iconic kind of like implied sex scene from North by Northwest where like the couple embraces, we cut away to like a train going in a tunnel and like other things?
Yeah.
Okay, so that Hitchcockian thing. This kind of does that with the blood and the magic. Like, I just thought, I mean, I get it. It actually makes sense. And it's like in a compelling way to like further the plotting and kind of this tying together of themes. But it just, I was like, oh yeah, that Hitchcock movie. I remember that.
Yeah, kind of like, yeah.
I
liked it. Something I hadn't considered, and I feel a little silly, so I'll just spoil this for you now, even though I don't think it matters at all. But like a lot of people read gay overtones into Jason Victor's relationship, which I just like totally didn't see at all the first time. And like I definitely can see it if I'm looking. Yeah. And they don't get together or have any kind of overt situation. So I don't know if it was intentional or not. But somebody somewhere on the internet probably wrote something about how that scene is portrayed like Jace is cheating on him. And I love that reading because it does feel that way. And I think symbolically it makes sense because he's his partner. Like, presumably Jace should be spending a lot of time with him, helping him figure this out. And, you know, Victor saved his bacon, basically, early on by saving his research and working with him. And Jace owes a lot of where he is now to Victor, his partner's direct intervention. And now he's like spending all of his time with his girl. Like it's spending all of his time getting into politics and schmoozing and stuff like that. And from his, like, he came from this like working class family, kind of clawing his way up. Now he's in a position of power and has access to power. And that's where all of his attention is going.
Right.
And I really like the idea of that and those things juxtaposed. So I do agree that a cartoon sex scene is funny. And I also wasn't expecting it at all.
No.
I was
it did kind of come in really quickly. Yeah.
It was another thing where I'm like, this really is like an adult show. Like you can forget it, even though obviously I think animation is for adults and etc. And I don't need to say that here, but it was, I haven't seen that really before in a show like this. So I was like, oh, okay. But I think it makes the most sense. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to show it in the way that they did, just to really convey those themes. And then poor Victor just like toiling alone in his, like, giving everything basically also to his thing that he's working on, which is not a person.
Right. Yeah, Victor, I think, really balances the tone of like Vi and that sort of like kind of more empty vessel of aggression. Victor's like so overly sympathetic. Like he's like the Dickensian like kid with the crutch character.
Absolutely
It's just all there. And it's funny because it's like such the opposite. It's part of like how good this show is. It like, well, if we have this, we need to have this to kind of create the perfect like design harmony for our perfect project. There's a couple like cute little moments there. I was getting a bit of a Miyazaki vibe from like kind of his realm. I don't remember who says it, but somebody says he's I think it's the Yordle. He's you're ruminating in your steel oasis. Yeah. Which is very like a Howl's Moving Castle-ish, or like that Miyazaki invention of the robot covered in moss, kind of like Nausicaa thing. I'm like, ooh, we're getting a little bit of that flavor, it's always nice.
Well, yeah, I loved that you actually so I think you had mentioned in the first episode talking about like not really getting flashbacks. And it was basically because we were in a flashback. And then in this round of episodes, we actually do get some straight up childhood flashbacks. Like the Caitlyn shooting scene was a childhood flashback. And then you get one of Victor that I actually really like. And there's more to it that kind of comes into play down the road a little bit. Mm-hmm. So it serves a little bit more than just one purpose of just like, oh, like here's where he came from, but you see him as a kid and like the conditions that he grew up in and that he was always unhealthy and just kind of like who he was spending his time with. And I think that is I find that very informative. I liked that, seeing you're hanging out in this place that now that's why you come down to sit in this hole and look out here. It's because like this is where you grew up. And so you're sort of coming back down to where you feel comfortable in a way, or like something that feels familiar to you. And also just kind of shows that he was like kind of a weird guy who was used to being alone. Now, I don't think through any fault of his own, but, as a result of his situation in life.
Is that lair, his steel oasis, is that where the infected salamander creature is being held?
I think they are two different. Well, so where he sits seems to be, I don't know, in like the underbelly of some kind of clock tower or something. I'm not really sure. Something mechanical, but I think where that salamander is like down further in the actual lower levels in some kind of cave, because it's where he's like, when he's a kid, he sets this mechanical boat down there and it kind of goes all the way into this underground situation. And that's where that salamander was. Right.
Yeah. So I'm a little, there's so much magic and variations of like alchemy or chemistry going on. Now, you can help me sort it out. So we've got the blue orb, which is just pure magic that powers machinery. And that's
It's like science magic.
Right. And that's Jace's like pursuit to kind of like wrangle that, because he says like, my father put hammers in the hands of the people who built this city. Imagine what we can do with magic. So
we could build
that's
big
his
gloves.
Right. Yeah. And then Jinx is like, she has one of them. and she's trying to figure out, oh, one of my favorite types of things in these urban fantasy steampunk universe stories is the janky prototype where somebody's trying to figure some shit out. And that thing Jinx is making that's trying to like hack the object. I like that thing.
I loved that scene where you see her doing that whole thing. And
that's
she's like,
awesome.
this is so lame, like reading the book. Yeah, I love that.
So that's the blue magic. Now we have the kind of pink Hot Topic goo that makes you kind of that's the Zootopia magic.
Yeah, the Hulk jelly.
So where does that come from? Do we know yet?
No.
Like where's Sulco getting that? Did he invent it?
It is not.
It's an infection, kind of, right?
It is not fully explained.
Is that coming from that salamander?
Unclear. More
unclear to
on
you
this.
Or unclear to me because I haven't watched
both.
There
are some really good. There's some good evidence one way or the other, but not conclusive.
All right, interesting. Okay, so
and it isn't really, elaborately. Just the same way that they don't say where these like Hextech crystals come from. It's also kind of treated in the same way.
Okay, and then we have isn't there a third sort of elemental?
The human spirit.
Sure, isn't that always at the core?
Is
of
there
any
one
good
though? I don't.
Narrative. No, I guess not. I guess it's those two things playing off each other. Yeah, I guess that was it. I felt like there was like a third kind of chaotic thing that was driving somebody's agenda, but I guess that's not the case.
Sometimes there's like some green energy going around.
Yeah, what's the green that comes out of the hoverboards? It's just generic power.
Magic juice. I don't know. Yeah, I guess
okay.
Electricity. I don't know.
It must be. Okay, just wondering. I mean, it all looks very cool. So whatever. Yeah. Okay, now, if you were a musician in this world, would you play the violin baritone instrument that is played on the stage during the sort of like the courting of Jace, where they're like, come to help us and we'll help you, like that? I mean, like that instrument.
No, because it looks really complicated. But it looks really cool. I would go. Nice. I literally bought Yo-Yo Ma tickets this morning. So like I absolutely would go to that concert. Yeah,
their sort of version of the opera, I suppose, is what it's
supposed
to be.
Which that was some world flavor that I really liked. Because again, no reason, but they did put thought into it. And I really liked that a lot.
That is, this show does love to pull from kind of, I guess, like operatic fantasy story, like the scene where somebody is corrupted during a tragic performance on a stage is happening at the same time. Like that's a very kind of, I mean, you even see it in Star Wars, like one of the Star Wars movies kind of.
Oh God, that's true. That's
so
true.
It's just always there.
Iconic scene.
That's sort of the thing, what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode, that triangle of like style, substance, and plot. Like the show, its plotting it is all so good, but there are a lot of points where it's not that it's unique. It's just pulling from the right place, from like cinematic or like narrative history. It's like, all right, we need a scene like this. We'll do it really cool, but it's not a scene unlike something you're going to find in another type of story.
And I think that's another thing that is so good about it, because like I don't know how possible it even is to do that, and I feel like a lot of shows or movies fall on their ass trying more than succeeding, and they just use everything so intelligently. And I want to talk about the opera scene quickly, because it is that, like, it's exactly that scene that you're describing, but they still use it in a way that just reinforces every little thing they're going for, that I just love it so much for that, because all of these counselors are there and they're like, we are not here to watch this thing. It's literally a backdrop for us to schmooze with each other and like make backdoor deals. Mm-hmm. And the best part is that Heimerdinger is just there having a great time and nobody is talking to him, which is something that is very important to his character and his situation. I don't know if we know all of that now, but like he's pretty ignorant about a lot of stuff and he's pretty detached. And it's like, okay, no wonder things are kind of the way that they are, because he's supposed to be like super wise, and he's supposed to be the one who's kind of in charge of everybody because he's been here the longest and he's 300 years old. And he's too busy just like enjoying the benefits of the station and like being earnest about it to realize that any of this corruption is even happening. Like, he's completely oblivious to it. And I think that's a great way to show that, with no dialogue being like, he's just not paying attention. Da, da, da,
Yeah.
da. Like, it's literally just a character moment. And it's just so well done.
Right. It's kind of it's like a turning point for this city, right? We're kind of like at this critical moment where things can kind of go one way or the other, depending on, I guess, basically, yeah, what Jace decides to do mostly. And then I suppose what Jinx accomplishes. Really, I think, right, those are like, seem to be the two main characters that are going to drive like the future of this city.
The progress, if you will.
Yeah, it is a very progressive place. They're willing to, I guess it's just I'm not going to understand. Are there aliens coming to this world and planet? Like, is there an intergalactic highway that passes through here? This isn't Earth, though. And so are the unnatural creatures on the planet mutants, or like, what is the
When you say
Yordle?
unnatural creatures, like what?
Well, we have this like giant salamander thing. Like, what is that? Is that just in this alternate reality there are giant salamanders, or is it from another planet?
I don't know. It's not, there's no space stuff that I'm aware of. I don't think there's any alien stuff exactly. One thing that I know, because I was curious to find out what the situation with Yordles was.
Yeah.
So this is like League of Legends lore, I guess, and not at all alluded to in the show at any point. But Yordles, like Heimerdinger, or like the Goblin Lady from the Underground, like they come from some kind of spirit realm that I guess possibly is sort of like a different dimension. It's like not on Earth, but not in a space way, more like in a fairy type way.
Oh, okay.
So they like had to portal here basically from like a magical land where they're from. That's essentially how I understand it.
Okay.
And I think, I guess that vibes kind of well with the hex tech thing and Jinx talking about how it opens a gateway. I think of it almost more as like the D&D like planar system, where like reality is a disc or whatever, and like all the other discs are sort of layered on top. So it's not like an endless multiverse. It's just there's like several different planes of existence all kind of layered on top of each other.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is like, I don't know how true that is or not, but there's I don't think there's any like space highway. And it's like these hex tech gates that are going to different places are literally just like, now we can like fly internationally, essentially.
Okay. So the world is still fairly small. We're not looking at a galaxy. We're still kind of like centralized on a continent, basically, a layered. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm good with that answer.
What else can I help you with?
Okay. Oh, it's like you're the information booth at the center of the...
Where else can I take you today?
Well, I suppose I don't need any more answers, but I just have like, what are my questions for the last act as we kind of like prepare for the I mean, everybody that's listening to this has probably watched the whole show, so they're just like,
just do it, just go, just watch it.
They could just skip ahead to the next episode, which will maybe be out by now. Who knows? Now, I guess here's the thing that shows things should keep being made. I agree with that. I think we should keep making things, but there's
controversial.
But there's like certain like places we end up with, like Lord of the Rings, where we're like, oh, this means this and this and this, and we can keep going deeper. But there is something about this show that kind of hits a bedrock because, one, it's based on a video game, kind of. Two, it's by modern people in a world that's not where a lot of the stories they love are coming from. But it's reflective of those stories. But it's kind of, it can never be what those stories were because the authors of this story don't have that experience, even though it still wants to evoke some of that magic. I feel like there's there's a part of this show that can't, it probably knows this too, that it can't really go certain places with its themes. Because like right now, if this was Lord of the Rings or something, we'd be like, going further, we're like, Tolkien in wartime. Let's like contemplate that. But this show doesn't have that aspect.
It doesn't have the weight of history.
Yeah, which is fine, but it's just something that the show almost wants you to, I don't know if it wants you to believe it does. Maybe I'm just taking it too seriously, but it's just something I think about with art that is powerful, but sometimes it makes me wonder how it's powerful.
You know what?
What do you think?
Well, I don't mean to derail your thought process, but
I was more spiraling. Yeah.
I think it will be very interesting in like 10 years to look back on this and think about that then. Because honestly, I think we are all too close.
Yes.
To do it.
That's true. I am a victim of trying to, because that's exactly what I don't want to do. I don't really want to have an opinion on something in the moment. I want to just kind of absorb.
Yeah. Well, and it's weird too. It's weird to think about because it just feels wrong that you can't automatically contextualize something as it's happening. But like, how can we? You don't have any hindsight to be like, well, here was what the state of the world was like.
Right.
When we blah, blah, blah. So it is funny. Like, it's very easy to watch this and be like, there's obviously some like capitalism kind of versus like the working class themes going on here. Okay. Like, I get that.
Are they like that relevant, or are they just sort of the tropes of those types of stories?
Well, I don't know. But also, I mean, I just like, it's obviously such a big problem in the world today now, politically and etc. And well, and there's other context to consider too that I am not nearly educated enough to get into, but like Riot is owned by Tencent, which is a Chinese company. And there's all these things to consider there too with like what they would or would not talk about. And there probably is an argument to be made that this show will not be as revolutionary, like in the literal sense of a revolution, because of that. You know, like it's the same thing as like Disney always censoring gay stuff out of the movies and blah blah blah, and the ongoing controversy with all of this stuff, and like, you know, because they know where their money comes from, and and like it's kind of bullshit, but we're all aware that that's what it directly affects the output of what they are making. And so it's hard to know, you know, we can't really know. It will be a lot easier and very interesting to look back on this like 10 years from now, or even like 20 years from now, and with more information and more distance, and be like, why was this the story that they wanted to tell? And I think that's why I keep getting so obsessive about like, why did they make like Vi and Jinx these characters that I find interesting and kind of like, I mean, they're just totally different from their original version. Like, why did you make characters that were so shallow and boring into interesting ones with an interesting relationship? And like, why did you pick this conflict? Like, I have so many questions about that. Like, Silco, I don't have to worry about because they made him up for the show, so I'm not like, okay. But like Caitlyn in the show too, if you Google Caitlyn, you'll be shocked. She is a steampunk, like, it's again super trashy, like possibly the trashiest design, completely different. It's more of like a steampunk, like Alice in Wonderland sort of Mad Hatter vibe on her, and she has a gun. It's very jarring and confusing. Nothing akin to this character whatsoever, and I just don't understand it. So like, what is at play here where you made a bunch of garbage and then you turn it into something that's actually really interesting that I would actually call art? I don't want to denigrate anything, you know, but like, I wasn't emotionally engaged with League of Legends, and now here I am, you know, being like, do I want to do a podcast about it? So I wish I knew. I wish I knew what was going on in there. I don't. How this show came about is miraculous to me.
Oh, good. I can feel we're at the end of the episode because I'm about to be like, it's a spiritual question, because you're basically saying like, why was this chosen to be imbued with life? Like, why was Pinocchio? Why did he get to be the real boy? It's such a like, was this his fate all along? Like, what you're asking is like quite a massive question. But I think to bring it all back, it is the illusion of life. Like, it is so powerful when a cartoon character truly like becomes believable that you're like, I can't believe it. And now to have that weird point of reference, every episode I feel older, but this makes me feel old in a new way. Like, oh yeah, I don't even have that point of connection with this character that's so vapid and kind of like gross, that to have them be transformed really does capture your imagination.
Yeah, it's
like that's such a modern thing.
The possibilities just like open up in my mind. It's like if somebody rewrote Twilight and it was actually good.
Right.
I'm like, what? Like, it's shocking. I'm sorry, I don't hate League of Legends. I just, whatever. Like, I don't know much about it, but
yeah.
Sorry, League of Legends. My bad.
No, that we love everything we talk about.
I love teamfight tactics.
Yeah, we've learned that. I think we need to make a bonus episode where you just sort of
No, I'm really bad
dig
at it.
in
I
on
don't want to talk about. I'm so bad. It's infuriating. I like try and I'm really bad at it. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that.
Okay. You got any other deeper thoughts on all this, or did we kind of like land on a ending in there somewhere?
I think.
Do you have more?
Not really. I just want to formally declare that I'm very excited for you to finish up the last 3 episodes. And I think it's going to be really fun to talk about those and also kind of pick back over some of what we've talked through so far.
Oh, a recap. Oh, yeah. What kind of...
I don't know so much a recap.
The magic?
I think, there's more. I'm telling you. So when I would pitch you this show... Like, one of the coolest things about it, I think, is that there is so much layered in that does make more sense or adds information once you know how everything kind of turns out. And it's just juicy in that way. Like, that's what, none of this was shallowly put together. It was just very thoughtfully done. And so I'm excited. And there's just times in this episode and the last one where you'll say something and I'm like, oh, I want to talk about that, but I can't yet. So there's that. There's some juice to that.
So what I'm getting is that there's like a Spider-Verse crossover in the last episode where
Spider-Man actually shows up. That's what's the crazy. He's a lead character originally. Not many people know that. Not a Marvel thing. It was a League of Legends character the whole time.
That's true from the very beginning. And that's all for now. You can check out our episode archive and other facts about us at cartoonfeelings.com, or tweet at us, or join us on Instagram. Both of those you can find at Feeling Cartoons.
That's true. And if you'd like to share your thoughts and questions, or your patents pending, you can write to us at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, it would be really cool if you would consider rating us on Apple Podcasts, and or leaving a review, and or sharing us with your cartoon feeling friends.
And we'll see you next time.